Welcome to another edition of Life, Love, and Philosophy. My special guest today is Buddhist scholar and author Percy Nanayakkara, author of a book entitled The Path to Freedom, A Guide to Buddhism, a book I recently read and highly recommend. Indeed, it's the best introduction to Buddhism I've ever read. Again, the name of the book, Path to Freedom, A Guide to Buddhism. Percy also is a producer of the CTV show Buddha Dhamma, and by profession is a computer consultant. Some years ago, I became very interested in Buddhism after reading the German philosophers Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, both of whom were attracted to certain Buddhist ideas. Indeed, Nietzsche said, in his opinion, Buddhism should be regarded more as a system of mental hygiene than as a religion. Percy, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I find your name, Nanayakkara, very interesting. Can you tell us where you were born and raised?
Yes, I was born and raised in Sri Lanka. Now, before that, Sri Lanka used to be called Ceylon. But actually, in history, Sri Lanka has been known by different names. The Greeks call it Serendip. Then the Portuguese call it Ceylon.
Portugal ruled Ceylon for a while, Sri Lanka.
Yes, parts of Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
The Dutch, Portuguese were the first Europeans to rule Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Then they were taken over by the Dutch. They also continued the name Ceylon. Then in the 19th century, the Britishers took over Sri Lanka. They occupied the whole country. And the name Ceylon, they anglicized it to Ceylon. But after gaining independence, and Sri Lanka, Ceylon was changed to Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is off the coast of India, the southern coast, is that correct?
Yeah, actually it is to the south of India. It's in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
It's an island nation, small island nation, 25,000 square miles, which is about the size of West Virginia.
I did mention to you that one of the things I found interesting in recent years is I run into a lot of Sri Lankans on Staten Island, and so many of them speak English beautifully. English, I assume, is taught in all the schools in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, that's right. Now, when we studied, English was the medium of instruction. But now, after that, the national languages, Sinhala and Tamil, they are the medium of instruction. But English is a compulsory second language.
Yeah.
So everyone speaks English, some amount of English.
It is interesting, wherever I travel, and I do a lot of traveling in Europe, a very large number of young people are learning English in Europe and speaking English. Holland is my home away from home in the summertime. And I know I'm accurate in saying at least 70 to 80% of the Dutch speak English and speak it well. Now, I understand you do much traveling. Where have you been and why do you go to the places you go to?
Okay, Phil, how it happened was this, that when I'm in younger days, I did my first degree in Sri Lanka. It was called University of Ceylon. Then after that, for postgraduate training, I came here to the US, and also in London and in Sydney, Australia. So for education, I was taken to these countries, and then, of course, later I began traveling because, for two things. One, I like traveling, visiting various places. And also in recent years, I go to places where there are Buddhist temples. Now, very soon, there will be a documentary on Buddhist temples in London. So these are the two things that take me.
Yes, I know that here at CTV, besides being the producer of the program Buddha Dhamma, you've done more than a few specials. I think my producer was telling me you've done 7 specials.
That's right, yes.
On Buddhism.
Yes.
I mentioned at the outset that I have read your book and read it very carefully. Again, the book is entitled The Path to Freedom, a guide to Buddhism, and I found it to be the best introductory book to Buddhism I've ever read. I've indicated to you that over the years I've read quite a few books on Buddhism. I would estimate at least 5, 6, 7 books. Several by the Dalai Lama, by the way, whose books I very much enjoyed reading. But I've never read a book that is a better introduction. Could you tell the people out there, how can they get a copy of this book?
Now, this book is not for sale. Actually, I wrote this, I got it, it was printed in Sri Lanka, got it shipped here, and I gave it to the 2 Buddhist temples, the Staten Island Buddhist Vihara, and also to the Queen's Buddhist Temple. So it is for free distribution. Anyone who contacts, say, Staten Island Buddhist Vihara, which is at 115 John Street, that is in Port Richmond.
Yeah, 115 John Street in Port Richmond. It's a Buddhist temple.
Buddhist temple.
And they can get a copy there.
Yes,
Okay,
free copy.
Thank you. Appreciate that. How did you get interested in Buddhism? Were you raised a Buddhist?
Yes, I was raised a Buddhist. My parents were Buddhists. But somehow, from very early stages, I was interested in reading more than the normal practices, customs that we follow. So, when I was in the university in Sri Lanka, it was called University of Ceylon, I went through these religious books and I found that the book has been in the library for several years. I was the first person to borrow the book from the library.
A book on Buddhism?
On Buddhism.
Yeah.
So that it was not fashionable to read about religion, but that is how I got interested, and in very early stages, maybe few years after graduating, I wrote a book called Rebirth, this Buddhist book.
Rebirth.
On rebirth, yes. Yeah. And later I wrote another book on Buddhist meditation. And the latest one is this Path to Freedom.
Yeah. In your book, you have a very good introductory chapter on Buddha, where you give an overview of his life. Could you tell the people a little bit about Buddha's life? He was born in the 7th century BC, correct?
Yeah.
And his life extended into the 6th century BC. Almost, I would say almost a contemporary of Confucius, but actually probably lived about 100 years before Confucius. Tell us a little bit about the Buddhist life.
Yeah. Now, Buddha is a title, is honorific, which means the enlightened one or the awakened one. His original name was, first name was Siddhartha, last name was Gautama. He was a son of a king. Now, those days in India, it was not one huge state or one huge nation. There are hundreds of small states. Now, India is a big country. So, bordering the modern Nepal, there was a state where he was born. He was born as son to a king. Actually, now, that's quite interesting thing here. Now, when his mother, Queen Maya, was expecting him, the first child, it is the tradition in Asian countries particularly for the first confinement for the woman to go to the mother's place. So following that tradition, the queen set out to her mother's palace, because mother was also a queen of an adjoining kingdom. They went in what is called, there were no vehicles, she was carried in what is called a palanquin. Palanquin is something like like a coach, but without leaves and without wheels, and it is carried on the shoulders of people. On the way, there was a nice park, so she wanted to rest there for a while. And she was set down upon it under a tree. She developed labor pains, and Siddhartha, that the Buddha's name, lay name, was born there. So significant thing is that although mother had palaces, father had palaces, all close relatives had palaces, he was actually born under a tree.
Buddha was a prince, correct?
Yes, he was a prince,
And
Prince Siddhartha.
for the early part of his life, he lived a life of luxury, isn't that right?
Yes.
Until about the age of 20, is that correct?
Yeah, yes. Even before that, you know, at the time Buddha was born, usually the wise men, the astrologers are consulted, and all wise men predicted a bright future for him, a man called Asita, just like Simeon, in case of Jesus, predicted the bright future for him. Asita predicted the bright future for him, and also predicted that he might become a recluse, but be a leader of a religion. So that although he had all the luxuries, I mean, he says that he had 3 palaces. Father built him 3 palaces. But father did not want to expose him to the normal environment outside the palace.
His father actually tried to shelter him in a certain way, that his father didn't want him to see a lot of the suffering in the world. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, the Buddha, as a young man, left the palace grounds one day, and he saw some old people, he saw some sick people. I think he may have seen a corpse, I'm not sure about that.
Yes.
And it stimulated his thinking. This disturbed him very much.
Yes.
But it stimulated his thinking in such a way that he wanted to explore what life is really all about, and to see if he could come to a greater understanding of reality, of the way things really are. Is that a pretty fair statement?
Yes, yes.
About him?
Yes.
And years later, is it not true, he wanders for years in search of truth,
Yeah. Now,
and finally develops the basis of Buddhism, which is usually referred to as the 4 Noble Truths. It's fair to say that's the foundation of Buddhism, the 4 Noble Truths?
yes.
Could you tell us
Yes.
what those
Actually, what
truths
happened
are?
was that now he got married. I mean, at a very young age, he had a son. But at the age of 29,
29.
at the age of 29, that is the age of he renounced. He left home
Yeah.
and became a recluse.
And lived a life of poverty, is that correct?
Yes, yes. Because at that time, in India, there was no Hinduism as such. There was Brahminism, but there were large number of different religious sects following different teachers. But one of the main principal thinking at that time was self-mortification. That is, by subjecting yourself to very austere means, life of difficulty, of suffering, that you can ultimately liberate from suffering.
This would involve, for example, restricting one's diet so that one eats almost nothing each day. And he experimented with this, did he not?
Yes.
The Buddha experimented with a life of self-mortification.
Yes.
But did not find it satisfying.
That is what
Didn't
happened.
bring the truth.
Yeah, that is what happened, that he, for 6 years, he was going from teacher to teacher. He would learn meditation and various practices, but he found that there is no solution still. So he left all that, and then that is why he followed what is called the middle path. Now, as a prince, he lived a life of luxury. As a recluse, he lived a life of self-mortification, lot of suffering. Say, even in the cold winter, they would sleep out with very bare clothing.
Yes.
So that time. Then he abandoned both these, extreme luxury and the austere means, and followed the middle path. And that is how he gained enlightenment,
Yeah.
seated under the Bodhi tree.
I mentioned before that everyone who studies Buddhism must learn about the Four Noble Truths, since again they form the foundation of the religion. Could you briefly go through what these Four Noble Truths are?
Yes. Now, essence of Buddhism is liberation from suffering. So, Buddha first declared in his first sermon, in his first discourse, the Four Noble Truths. The first is there's suffering. Second,
Suffering, the Buddha claimed that suffering is an inevitable part of life. Everyone suffers.
Yeah. But now, Buddha used the term dukkha. Now, we have this difficulty in translating certain words because in each language, there are certain intrinsic meanings given to them.
The Buddha spoke a language called Pali.
Pali.
Yeah.
Pali, which is Indo-European language, but it is like Latin is a dead language now. But the original, the scriptures are in language called Pali. So he used the term dukkha, which is freely translated to English as suffering. But suffering does not mean, dukkha does not mean sickness, old age, and death. It means the unsatisfactoriness of nature, because certain disappointments, discomfort, and all these come within.
I find what you're saying interesting, because I think some people would say, in response to the idea that the first noble truth is that life is suffering, some people would say that's too pessimistic. I don't suffer. But if one looks at what he's really saying, as I understand it, he's talking about the idea that all of us experience some anxiety every day. We experience stress. We experience nervousness. So that suffering doesn't have to involve illness. It could, but it doesn't have to.
No, yes.
And of course, we all experience disappointments and frustrations. So he's talking about suffering. He's talking about anxiety, nervousness, frustrations, disappointments, which perhaps we all experience regularly. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is because of the changes now. There are certain things that Buddha have, certain fundamental things. Like, now, Buddhism is like any science, it has a causal nature in the sense that there is a cause and an effect for everything. There's a cause and effect.
Law of karma?
Yes, yes. So, as I said, now suffering is a very broad thing. Then Buddha said, now, there is a cause for this suffering. Anything, this is the causal nature, that anything must have a cause. Now, for instance, A being there, to put in a simple formula, A being there, B arises. If A is not there, B cannot arise. So, there is suffering, which is caused by what he used the term tanha, which is freely translated into desire, but actually that is not the correct meaning.
Desire.
Desire, because our wanting,
craving,
our wanting certain things, our wanting for things not to change, but to remain as they are.
So Buddha is saying, in effect, that so much of our suffering, maybe most, if not all of it, is related in some way to our desires.
Our desires,
and
our
he
cravings.
would say that our desires are insatiable. No matter what we do, we cannot satisfy our desires.
Because you come to a stage where then you are not satisfied, you want some more.
So now Buddha now develops a prescription for dealing with this. Again, he's saying life is suffering, we're nervous, we're anxious. It's caused primarily by desires. And what is the prescription he gives for helping us to reduce the suffering that we do, to make us more serene?
Now what Buddha said, that is the third noble truth. That is, that if you remove the cause of suffering, then suffering cannot exist there. So, the cause is our craving. If we get rid of our craving, our wanting, our desires, then suffering does not arise. And for that, he recommended the fourth one, the fourth noble truth is the path leading to the ending of suffering. So those are the four noble truths that the Buddha, that there is suffering.
So the fourth noble truth involves a specific prescription for reducing suffering and increasing tranquility, and that's called the Eightfold Noble Path, correct?
That is right.
So if someone wants to become a Buddhist, or at least learn the Buddhist way to more happiness, one would have to learn the Eightfold Noble Path.
Yes.
It's a system of, I don't know if a system is the right word, it's a theory that there are 8 steps involved in trying to achieve more tranquility. Could you begin with step 1? We'll try to go through them.
Yeah, but now, but this is to achieve the ultimate aim of Buddhism. But for lay people, Buddha recommended just 5 basic moral principles. They are called Panchasila or Pansil, the 5 precepts. Now, first one is do not kill. So, I mean, abstain from killing.
Yes.
Second one, abstain from stealing. Don't take anything that is not given to you. Third one, he mentioned, was sexual misbehavior. And the fourth one, not to deal in lies, slander, not to speak untruth.
Be careful of how one speaks to others.
Yes. And the fifth one is to abstain from liquor and any intoxicants.
So Buddhists don't drink liquor. They don't even drink wine. Is that correct?
No, not really, but they do. Some do, but sometimes some do for the health reasons. But it is very rare. It is not a very common practice among Buddhists.
Now, you mentioned that if someone wants to follow in Buddha's footsteps and to try, again, to acquire more tranquility, that the person is to avoid sexual misconduct.
Yes.
Now, I read that part of the book very carefully, being an American.
Yes.
I read that. Well, I think perhaps it's true of all people. They would want to know what he meant by sexual misconduct. And could you elaborate on that? According to the Buddhists, what constitutes sexual misconduct?
Yes. Now, there are certain basic things that the Buddha has said. That first thing is, if you are in a committed relationship, then you must not have a sexual relationship with another. Otherwise, uncommitted 2 adults, consenting adults, having a sexual relationship is not against Buddhism.
I was raised Catholic. In fact, I went to a Catholic high school, and we were taught, and I'm sure the Catholic Church still teaches, that premarital sex under any conditions is sinful. If I understood the paragraphs in your book concerning sexual misconduct, and if I understand you right now, my understanding is the Buddhists do not believe that all premarital sex constitutes sexual misconduct. They don't believe that all premarital sex is evil, for lack of a better word. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
Yeah,
yes.
As long as the people are committed to each other. They have affection for each other.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And also, of course, he condemned sex with children.
Yes.
And also sex with animals, which he condemned.
Yes.
But for consenting adults.
And also he condemned adultery,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So if one is married,
that is the first thing he said.
upon.
When you are in adultery means that when you are in a committed relationship, you mustn't have sexual relationship with someone else.
Did Buddha take any position on homosexuality?
No.
No position.
No position.
What do the present Buddhist leaders teach about homosexuality?
No, that is another way of behavior.
So if 2 people are committed, if 2 gay people are committed to each other and love each other and have affection for each other, the many Buddhist leaders today would not condemn that. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah.
Buddha never, Phil, Buddha was a very liberal person. Now, as I said, he prescribed 5 basic moral and ethical principles, which is called Panchasila. Now, any person belonging to any other religion can practice these 5. That is, one thing, not killing. Secondly, not stealing, sexual misconduct, abstain from sex. Then, not dealing in lies and slander, and then intoxicants. These are the 5 ways. Now, a person, a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, can follow these basic principles of Buddhism.
Yeah.
What Buddha, so that way, that he was a very liberal person.
I mentioned to you that I often read the Dhammapada.
Yes.
The Dhammapada, as I understand it, is the best single source for quotations from the Buddha.
Yes.
And one of the things I find extremely interesting is that the Buddha believed that all of our problems emanate from our mind.
That's right.
That if we wish to live better lives, we must learn to think more clearly. Let me just quote a few sentences from the Dhammapada to give the audience some idea as to what Buddha is talking about here. He opens the Dhammapada. The very first sentence says this: "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world. With our thoughts we make the world." Later on in the Dhammapada it says this, and I find this very interesting: "Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother."
Yes.
So what the Buddha essentially is saying here is that if we can learn to think more clearly, if we can learn to see reality, and by reality he meant the way things really are,
Yes.
that is going to help us enormously in living better lives. I think in your book you said something to the effect that the mind is to Buddhists what God is to Christians. Some statement like that, did you not?
Yes,
Yeah.
quite right.
I see we're running short on time. Would you be willing to come back for a second program? Because I'd very much like to continue this discussion.
Of course, yes. I would be glad to do that.
Thank you, Percy.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
As usual, I would like to end my program with a quotation from Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau, in his masterpiece, Walden, said this: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."